This is The Body's Compass with Matt Sorensen doing a solo episode talking about how to enjoy what most people call naughty foods, from coffee and tobacco to beer and bread. Matt shares his simple bread recipe that he learnt in Germany. So, let's join this week's episode.
Hello and welcome to a solo episode today. This has been inspired by several patients recently who all ask me the same thing, and it's a question I myself get and a lot of other health professionals get, is the question, what should I eat? And it's quite a tricky question to answer for many reasons. One being you probably need to take half a day to go through it and give that question the answer it deserves. But also, people get meal plans all the time, and I'm not a huge fan of meal plans for many reasons. The main one being, unless you've had extensive testing or you have a very, very unique condition that requires very specific nutrition and you have an incredible relationship and tuning into your body, then it's really hard to prescribe a meal plan. So what I do personally is teach people how to have a relationship with their body, which ultimately inspired my first book that I wrote, Doing the Wrong Things Right, How to Cheat Foods Effectively. And it became because people were coming in with all kinds of inflammatory disorders, all kinds of addictions, and they thought they were eating okay foods, or they were just being naughty and rewarding themselves several times a day. But that was really the thing driving the inflammatory response, which kept them coming back to me. So initially I tackled it full on and said cut it out. And that was obviously met with the dragon within. So I learned how to compromise. And for example, if someone drank too much coffee, I needed to learn how to build the bridge between the addiction to balance that control. And I didn't want to be the guy to take that away from that person, because a lot of people living their life in their perception, that's the one thing that they're looking forward to most. Just coffee as an example. So I essentially set up a little pamphlet initially, which turned into an ebook and then turned into this paperback, which I've only got one left in stock on my person. Unfortunately, it's too expensive to print in Australia, but it is available on Amazon if you're interested. But I'm going to give you the ABCs of it today, because I think it's quite simple information. It's hopefully very helpful, and it's not that difficult to really implement. And many people ask me all the time, what should I eat? What should I eat? What should I eat for this? What should I eat for that? Weight loss is a big one. Now, I don't deal with that many weight loss patients, because I find that weight loss patients, it's usually a battle between the left ear and the right ear. I mean, if someone really wants to lose weight, they will. Their desire to lose weight has to be stronger than the desire to have the cake or the biscuits or the McDonald's or whatever their little thing is. So that's where the real war is. But the battles can be won day to day, meal to meal. And also a lot of people will think, well, I have reaction to dairy, but I only have a little bit in my coffee. But then I have to explain to them, if you have reactions to dairy, in this example, then as long as you've got one atom of that substance in you, it's going to continually to create inflammation for the entire time that it's in you. So you're getting an inflammatory response each second that it's in you. And depending on what book you read, food retention stays in us 55 to 72 hours. So you can have your cappuccino on Monday, and end of Wednesday, it's still creating inflammation. And then if you have 2 or 3 of them a day, you can see how the effects add up. And of course, each person reacts differently to different things. So that's just another reason why it's almost impossible, my only humble opinion, to write an accurate diet plan. So what I'm going to take you through today is just a quick 101 and just a few little tips for you to enjoy your favorite foods, favorite drinks, and not have the guilt associated with it, because I think life's all about celebrating, and it largely goes to your relationship to the thing that you're having a lot of, be it coffee, alcohol, sugar. Your relationship to that food or that drink is arguably more powerful than the actual food or drink itself. Some may debate that, and that's fine. I see both sides of that story, and I agree with both sides of that story. This is mostly based on my own experience working with people for the last 20 or so years. So I don't have these up in any particular order. These are just the order in the book. So these are, when people ask me, what should I eat? How should I have this? This is essentially what I tell them. Now, probably the most common one I get is coffee. And coffee's an interesting one. It's actually quite a funny story of how coffee was invented around 400-500 years ago. Coffee as we know it today, by an Ethiopian farmer who lost some of his goats in some shrub, and he finally found them, and when they finally found the goats had eyes of dinner plates. So that's essentially how coffee was invented, for lack of a better word. But first of all, it's important to know what coffee actually does to the body, because people just drink the stuff and they get wound up, they get a bit of a buzz, a bit of an energy kick, and they think, oh, this stuff's awesome. I know, because I'm one of them. But it's all about knowing what it does to you. And you can read a research paper and say caffeine has this effect or that effect, which is fine. But again, we all have our own unique chemistry, so therefore we all process things different. So one of the main things with any kind of what should I eat kind of question is, well, tap into yourself first. And I tell students and patients all the time that as huge as the nutrition industry is, as much as you can rely on supplements and, do all the biohacking and blah, 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 that can't compete against what goes in your mouth, let's say three times a day, 21 times a week. And you can also imagine how complex and arguably political the nutrition industry is. All you really need to know for most people, unless you're really suffering from an illness or in the top 1 to 3% of athletes on the planet, everyone outside of that really only needs to know about page 47 in Paul Chek's book, How to Eat, Move, Be Healthy. Those of you watching the video, I'm just showing it here. Now, this is obviously not a new version of that book, but essentially it just shows you long-term responses, short-term responses to too much carbohydrate, and then what you need to do to get back into he calls it the power zone. Long, short-term responses to too much fat. So, for example, if you have too much fat, you might feel lethargic, mentally sluggish, or you might crave sweets. If you have too much protein in the long term, it can cause autonomic dysfunction, depression, obesity, toxicity. And then he shows you little ways to get back into the power zones. But a lot of people have headaches, anxiety, or they don't feel satisfied, or they get hungry really quickly. Well, that's a short-term response to too many carbohydrates. Now, it doesn't really matter what kind of quote-unquote diet or ism that you have. It's got to agree with your body. And I would ask the question to anyone who prescribes themselves to paleo or veganism or vegetarianism or carnivore, whatever your thing is, does your body match your beliefs? I'll leave that there for now. So without further ado, caffeine. Now, caffeine has a very yang response to the body. A really yang effect would be better. A very drying effect, a very masculine go, 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 go. So what happens when you have caffeine? It actually stimulates the HPA axis, the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, and it speeds up cellular metabolism. So you actually, at the cellular level, live more minutes per minute. So it actually ages you faster, biologically speaking. Caffeine has a half-life of 4 to 6 hours, which meaning if you have 20 milligrams of caffeine at midday, then at 6 p.m., you've still got 10 milligrams of caffeine going through your system, producing cortisol, the very hormone that's supposed to be lowering, and where all the rest repair sleepy hormones start to come online, they're being suppressed by the cortisol in the system. And that leads on to a myriad of other things from there. But I've found working with people, it wasn't necessarily the caffeine. It was also the habit of having the coffee. So I've had to work with many people to not necessarily get rid of the habit, but just change what's in the cup. But we can talk about that another time. So when we have coffee, I have 3 non-negotiables. And if a patient isn't willing to stick to this, or at least work in a way that we can come to some kind of agreement on some level. Firstly, if you're going to drink coffee, it has to be organic. Number one, the coffee bean is one of the most sprayed crops on the planet. And from my greenkeeping days, I can tell you that pesticides are usually either neurotoxic or estrogenic. Neurotoxic meaning they affect the nervous system. And you can imagine all the neurological diseases out there. That's a neurotoxic chemical. Estrogenic means it boosts estrogen levels. So all the joints in our body have estrogen receptors, which creates a laxing effect, a lengthening, a softening effect on all the joints of the body, which isn't great if you're trying to gain muscle. Also, too much estrogen deeply disrupts our fertility or women's menstrual cycles. What's rampant in the world today? Neurological disorders and fertility. I'll leave that one there. So firstly, it has to be organic, preferably fair trade organic, but we can only get what we can get. Second, we need to have it with fats, be that on a full stomach, or what I like to do personally is put a little bit of butter in my double espresso in the morning, and then that does me for the day. Reason being, and a lot of people screw their noses up at that and say, well, don't knock it till you've tried it. The caffeine gets tied up in the fat molecules of the butter. You can also use coconut oil, ghee, any nut oil, really. I remember, I think sesame oil tasted pretty good, though I think it turned it green. Anyway, caffeine gets tied up in the fat molecules, and then it acts as more of a slow release. We've all heard of slow release fertilizer. You don't get that massive growth spurt when you put on fertilizer. So you get a nice slow drip kind of version of energy. So it's not such a shock to the adrenal glands and not such a shock to the pancreas, which has to secrete insulin to help balance the cortisol out. Two of your three primary hormones there. Any caffeine, especially coffee, needs to be consumed by 2 p.m. A lot of people come to me with low energy, ask what time they go to bed, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 1 o'clock, whatever it is. Oh, I can't get to bed, but they're watching YouTube or TV, and their last coffee is 6, 7, 8 p.m. So I explain exactly what I just explained to you, and I would say half people listen, but then half people have to keep doing it because they're in the habit of doing it. So it comes back to your relationship to the thing. So considering the half-life of caffeine, we need to have it before 2 p.m. to give ourselves a chance to wind down through the afternoon. Really from about 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock onwards, depending on the person and how much stimulation we've had through the day, our rest repair hormones are trying to come online. And that's why we feel tired, because we are most efficient at resting and repairing when we're asleep or doing very little to nothing at all. And coffee is a huge antagonist to that entire process. So if you're going to have coffee, ideally short espresso, maybe even a double espresso if you're hardcore, with a little bit of butter or nut oil, or on a after food and before 2 p.m. Another critical thing is that you have to chase it with water, not juice, not milk, not anything else. Some water, where if you were to pour it into a glass, you would see through the glass. Clear water. I'm only explaining it like this because I've had many conversations about what water is. So remember, caffeine's very drying. So you've had the yang, you need the yin to balance it out. If you think of having a coffee as minus a glass of water for your day, for your daily hydration, well, you need to balance it back out. The more coffee you have, it's the equivalent of taking money out of the bank, but it's energetic money. So water is replacing what you've borrowed. Next, we go to alcohol. Now, I'll tell you a quick little story about a patient who came to me who was an alcoholic. We're still working together today. Before you judge, hear me out. He came to me as an alcoholic. He had yellow eyes, red skin, kind of blotchy skin. He was also shaking a lot. And he came to me essentially with depression, but we found out that he'd been labeled an alcoholic. Now, when we started working together, I was quizzing him about, how did this habit form, all the questions. Therapist minds think, okay, well, that he's using alcohol as a medicine of some sort, or he's trying to suppress something or escape something, whatever that is. Turns out, not really, not at all. He was more affected by the fact that it had been labeled by a medical doctor, what he perceived as society, as an alcoholic. So he was more upset about the label than the alcohol itself. And as far as alcoholics went, I think he averaged 2 or 3 bottles of wine and or half a case of beer. So not, bottles and bottles of hard liquor or alcohol, but still decent enough. So when we started to work together, I said to him, I explained all the alcohol things to him. And we finally came to an agreement. We compromised. And I said, don't stop drinking yet. Therapist of the year right here. Hear me out. Don't stop drinking yet. I just want you to do 2 things. Firstly, anything that you drink, I want you to have an organic or preservative-free version of it. So he went to organic wine. Then he started to drink ale instead of lager. And that's all he drank. He drank water as well. We talked about the water thing. So he upped his water. He switched to organic. I said, the next thing I want you to do is state your dream. He stated his dream or his primary goal, which funnily enough had nothing to do with alcohol. Stated that. I said, okay, next time you're going to have a sip, before you have the first sip, I want you to do an action item towards your stated goal right here. And then hold that drink as a celebration. He did that and he came back a month later. His eyes had cleared up completely. His skin had cleared up completely. His shaking was down 90% just from his relationship to the thing. I can happily say he's significantly cut down those numbers of drinks now, but that's just my example of the mindset and relationship towards the very thing. So if you're going to have alcohol, you need to have food first. The best way to piss off your gut is to come home from work after a really stressful day with an empty stomach with a glass of alcohol. That is the best way to piss your body off. Dairy, big one. We're sold that dairy is wonderful for our bones and it contains all the calcium and the vitamin C and the proteins and the whatever the ads say. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not. But does any of that mean anything at all if your body can't use it? No, it can't. So when we're talking about dairy, we need a hormone called rennet that causes dairy to curdle in our gut, so it makes it more absorbable to us. However, most people over the age of 2, 3, sometimes 4 stop developing the hormone rennet, and therefore they can't effectively digest dairy anymore because native tribes stop breastfeeding around the ages of 2, 3, and 4 years of age. So really, we don't need dairy if you kind of think about it. If you are going to have dairy and you are stomping your foot on the ground right now and swearing at me through whatever device you're listening to me through, that's fine. However, if we're going to have dairy, we need to look at raw dairy. Lots of stuff in the news, and someone might make a comment that raw dairy is going to kill us all, or whatever that headline is. I've never known anyone to be affected by raw dairy. Pasteurization, invented by Louis Pasteur, was invented for one reason and one reason alone, and that was to get milk from coast to coast. So we had to kill all the live bacteria to make it more transportable, therefore to make it last longer on the shelf. Raw dairy only lasts about 2 or 3 days, and that's your window to consume it. Another argument I would have for the raw dairy thing is if nature produces it, how can it be that bad? Now, on the other side of that, nature produces a lot of things that could also kill us. That we've been having raw milk for centuries, and we've made it this far. If you can't get raw dairy, it has to be organic. A lot of dairy farmers that I know use a lot of hormones and antibiotics. A nutrition expert once said, the antibiotics don't affect the quality of the milk. Well, I don't understand how that's absolutely anything remotely possible. Anything you have gets used by your entire body, and we consume an expression of that. Milk is an expression of the cow or the sheep or the goat. So I don't know how it can't affect that. If you don't do very well on cow dairy, goat and sheep milk is a lot more compatible with the bacteria of the human gut. And some even say that camel's milk products is more compatible still. I haven't tried camels, but I don't do too bad on dairy. I'm just not drawn to really do it. I have the occasional bit of cheese, but not very much. Doesn't really do much for me. If you suspect that you have some kind of reaction to dairy, maybe you get headaches, maybe you feel bloated, maybe you get brain fog, maybe you get constipated or diarrhea, good chance you've got some kind of reaction to dairy. Even achy joints, a lot of gas, weird skin reactions. I had one lady one time who actually lost vision in her eyes. She reacted that bad. So if you do suspect any of that, especially the eye thing, then I would cut out dairy for 3 to 6 months and see how your body reacts. Get it completely clear, give your body a rest. I've never known anyone to feel worse after cutting out dairy. Fat is a big one. When people mention fat, people think if they eat fat, they're going to get fat, which is completely false. That was funnily enough, a little marketing ploy by the sugar industry back in the 80s to kind of sell that idea to people. And it worked, credit to them. But fat is a buffer. Fat is our storage. We need healthy fats. Good quality fat is wonderful for our immune system. It is our storage cabinet for if we can't eat. Back in the day when we were cavemen, we wouldn't have eaten much through the winter, potentially. So we had to rely on our fat stores. Now, it all depends on the quality of the fat. All mammals store toxins in the fatty tissue. Now, people think grain-fed beef, for example, is the be-all and end-all and wonderful, superior product. But cows aren't designed to eat grain, so therefore it has to create inflammation. Any inflammation that's going to kill the cow, their system has to shove it into the fat tissues to protect the nervous system of the cow. But yet we've got those toxins in the fatty cuts of meat, and we wonder why we're tired and sick all the time. So quality is key. The animal, if you're eating flesh, the animal has to be raised and finished on food that it was designed to eat. Period. When you're cooking, a lot of people cook with olive oil. And I actually recently saw Gordon Ramsay say something about if you're going to cook with olive oil, it's got to be for a split second because it doesn't take long to go rancid at all. When I cook with lard, ghee, duck fat, coconut oil, tallow, because these have a very high boiling point, so they don't go off. They maintain their biochemical kind of DNA structure, whatever that's called. But when we look at vegetable oils, then they go rancid really, 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 really quick. Olive oil is very good at room temperature for a salad or something. If you're going to cook meat or use something in a roast, as an example, then you're better off with these higher saturation point oils. Grains. This is a very, very interesting one. How many people do you know that love their crackers, love their biscuits, love their pastas, love their breads? Well, and they have them and they feel like absolute crap. That's because the grains, depending where you are in the world, typically in the Western world in particular, aren't processed favorably for human health. It's all about growing the crop as quickly as you can, cultivating it, getting it processed and prepped for sale, and then next. It's all about the profit. When we look at grains, what's really interesting is we can have some bread here or some pasta here, feel like crap, go to Italy, go to France, go to Spain, go to Germany, have the pasta, have the bread, have the pastry, or maybe even have some cheese there, and you feel absolutely fine. Isn't that interesting? I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a second. If you are going to have grains, you can try the gluten-free. I'm not a big fan of the gluten-free pastas. For me personally, they taste like cardboard, and I don't like eating cardboard. But you can get activated grains. You can get whole grains. That's what we're designed to be consuming. You can activate a grain or a nut simply by, depending on the nut and the grain, you need to soak it a certain amount of time, usually anywhere between 8 to sort of 48 hours, depending on what it is. I think almonds ideally are for about 22 hours, and that breaks down the phytic acid, because most grains are coated in a phytic acid, which we cannot break down. So therefore we need to activate it by soaking it and getting rid of that acid so then we can digest the food. Now, if you've got this far into the podcast, you are in for a treat, because I'm going to give you a recipe. And many of my patients who I've seen since September-ish of 2025 have asked me for this. So last year I went to Germany, and before going over, I was actually getting a little bit anxious, a little bit concerned that I'm going to be having probably beer every day, probably breads and pastas and cheese and schnitzel and all that kind of stuff every day. So, God, I'm not going to crap for a month. However, happy to report that when I was there, having all of those foods every single day, I've never been so regular in my entire life. So I was thinking, how can this be? What's the difference? I know a lot of people had reported about this going to Italy, having the pasta or the pizza, and in America or England or Australia, wherever they're from, they would get really bad reactions and feel like crap. They would go there and have it and feel amazing, feel normal. They wouldn't feel anything, really. So I did a bit of research, and I can't speak on half of the rest of Europe. I think this is Germany, maybe Denmark as well. In Germany, they have a quality control law. So, for example, when they're making beer, in which there are over 3,000 types of beer, and no, I have not sampled all of them, in their quality control law, they're only allowed to use, I think, a maximum of 5 ingredients, and it has to be produced the same way. And it's very similar with bread. All they can have is butter, water, yeast, flour, and then whatever. If it's seeded bread, they've got to have the seed. Nut bread, they've got to have the nuts, and whatever that other kind of bit is. That's it. So the good news is that I have been making our own bread at home and been having bread since I got back all but every day. Maybe I missed a few days here and there, and I feel absolutely fine. And I would not be saying that if it wasn't true, and I wouldn't be bloating about it either, pun intended. So if you like, press pause. So I'm going to give you a recipe. If you did pause, welcome back. Here is the recipe that I use to make my own bread. And I've given this to many a patient who, if I've given it to 10 people, I think about 4 have actually done it, and they've all raved about it. So this is a classic German recipe for bread, and they are the leading bread people. Firstly, need 500 grams of flour. My personal favorite is a dark rye and wholemeal flour. I've also experimented with a bit of spelt. All work really well. Put that into a bowl. Get a good chunk of butter. Got to be good quality, organic, ideally raw, but, organic cultured butter is the way forward. Put that in there as well. Might help to melt it a little bit first, help with the mixing. Decent pinch of salt as well. I forgot to mention you have to activate some yeast or get some activated yeast, fresh live yeast in there first. In Australia, they come in little sachets. So you just put the sachet in with some water first for about 10 minutes, let it wake up a bit, pour that into the mix, and then you pour that into the mix with a cup of water, and then pour another cup of water in as well. Now with the mixing, you got two options. You can use one of those bread mixy machine things for 7 minutes. Germans are very precise, 7 minutes. Or with your hands, massage it in and mix it up for 10 minutes. When you've done that, get a tea towel, wet it, put it over the bowl. You can put it somewhere in the sun or somewhere warm, and that'll let it rise up. Leave that for no less than, I would say, probably an hour. I prefer to leave it for a couple of hours. Once you've done that, you would have seen that what would have taken up maybe a third of the bowl has now all but filled the bowl. Preheat oven to 160. This should be a cooking show. Preheat oven to 160. Take the bread out of the bowl, form it into a baguette or a loaf or a roll or whatever your desired shape is. Once you've shaped it and then the oven's ready to go, get a bowl or a dish of water in the bottom to create some humidity. Put that at the very bottom, put the bread in, 45 minutes, done. Try that and you are welcome. That is my famous German bread recipe. So that's grains. We can talk about salt. Salt's been talked about to death, as has been sugar. We know particularly white salt is extremely toxic to the body. We know white table salt has an active constituent in it that is actually in rodenticide, which is rat poison. So we want to avoid that if possible. We want colored salt, gray, pink. You can still get unprocessed white salt, depending on where it comes from in the world. I'm more of a Celtic sea salt guy. I've tried I had Murray sea salt. That's too bad. Murray River sea salt. Tried the rock salts. I just personally prefer Celtic sea salt, but it really depends on the person. With sugar's a huge subject, and it is in almost everything. They've put sugar in cigarettes, they've put sugar in steak at restaurants because sugar is highly addictive. Therefore, it makes you want more. So simply reading the packet, anything that has OSE in it means sugar. It doesn't really matter where it's come from, especially when you see the word natural ingredients. That has now given food manufacturers a license to basically put whatever they want in there. As long as it's come from a strawberry or it tastes like a strawberry or it remotely resembles some kind of strawberryness, they can put natural ingredients in there. So often people say that Coke, for example, is so bad for you because it's got so much sugar in it, which makes me kind of laugh. So I think actually sugar is probably the healthiest thing in Coke. Never mind all the other chemical shit that they use to make that stuff up. But sugar is in a lot of things. But if you essentially eat a diet with fruit, veg, meat, of course you're going to get natural sugars from below ground vegetables and fruits. That's a natural fruit, which we absorb a lot more. Some people don't love all the fruits, and that's fine. I'm not a huge fruit guy. I'm more of a above ground veggie, the odd root vegetable kind of guy. Maybe I'm boring, but I feel really good, and I don't get digestive disorders from it. It's also really dependent on what's seasonally available. If you're in the middle of winter and you have bananas and pineapples and mangoes available, you really have to question where that's come from, because it's definitely not local, I can tell you that. Lastly, tobacco. This would be a little bit controversial, and that's absolutely fine. People think tobacco, they think cancer, they think cigarettes, they think, limbs falling off, gangrene, all these kinds of things, which I cannot disagree with. However, if nature produced it, there's got to be something in there for us. Even the most poisonous plants have certain extracts that we can actually use, and they have used in medicines today. And isn't it interesting that people talk about how bad chocolate is for you? Well, raw, dark chocolate, cacao is extremely healthy. And personally, my body loves it. I'm not talking about the Cadbury shit. I'm talking 70+% dark chocolate, which could go under the caffeine heading. But anything that nature produced has to have something for us. A little interesting tangent I can share, and this is the genius of the food manufacturing industry. Cadbury identified essentially how to get people to crave their chocolate, because humans, we have our perfect food, the ideal food for a human in our own satiety centers of our brain, which is the part of the brain that tells us that we're hungry and tells us that we're full as well. There's two foods that are 50% carbohydrate and 50% fat. One is our mother's breast milk. Two is Cadbury chocolate. Credit where it's due. And that's why a lot of people crave chocolate. But I'm a dark chocolate guy. So getting back to tobacco, chocolate or cacao and pepper, they were once upon a time one of the highest tradable and valuable commodities that we used to trade with. So you ask what happened. So if you're going to have tobacco, avoid the flame. When you have flame with tobacco, it releases the chemicals that everything else is being bunched in there with it. Also, all the pesticides, so ideally organic tobacco. I know a lot of people use the volcano vaporizer. It's the healthiest way that I know to have it. You can also have organic tobacco butter and tobacco soap, which I haven't used personally, but it is available. You got tobacco teas as well. And the funny thing with tobacco, it's highly antifungal. It actually helps aid digestion. And for people with eating disorders and they eat too much, it actually helps suppress hunger as well. So tobacco's a funny one. But also, interestingly, with tobacco, people get told that nicotine's the worst thing. That's the chemical that, that gets you. However, if you've studied any of Dr. Brian Ardis's work, he shows extensively in his research that nicotine is one of the most illness-preventing chemicals in the world today. He's even stated research of people with stage 4 brain cancer, glioblastoma, they wore nicotine patches, and within 4 months, their brain tumor had all but disappeared. So that's the power of nicotine. And if you think nicotine's just in tobacco, it's also in tomatoes, eggplants, a little bit in cucumber. So these things are everywhere. It's how it's marketed to you. So that was really inspired by a few conversations I've had recently. Food doesn't have to be such a massively complicated thing. All you need to do is develop a healthier relationship with the food, respect the food, because when you're eating the food, you're essentially taking on the consciousness of that food. That's why when you have sugar or caffeine, you get really wound up, because that's the state. If you could talk to a coffee bean, that's what state it would be in all the time. And another way to prove that, if you think that's very, very woo-woo, is when you take plant medicines, you feel the effect of the plant medicine. So the only difference between a medicine and a drug is a dosage. And that's where you've got to listen to your body and have that relationship within yourself, because only you can prescribe what's good for you. And of course, if you need help, there's plenty of professionals out there. But the first thing I would recommend is just pay attention to how you feel. Write down what you've eaten, how it made you feel physically, mentally, what was your mood like, what was your energy like. Just get that data for yourself, because no test can really compete with that. You can get all the blood screenings and the salivary tests and all this kind of stuff, but that's just going to tell you one thing, that how you were at that particular moment in space-time. It's the equivalent of taking a photo of an entire movie. So I hope that helps.
You've been listening to Matt's solo episode of the Body's Compass podcast. If you like this week's episode, please consider giving us a 5-star rating and a warm review on the platform you're listening from. Please share this episode with someone you think it might help. If you want to find out more, give us a follow on Instagram at the Body's Compass, subscribe to Matt's YouTube at Matt Sorensen Live, or swing by healhub.net. Thanks for tuning in. Catch you next time.